sounds like a very generic thing to say. I'm going to use this stool here. About a year and a half ago, I had very extensive spinal surgery, and so being on my feet for an extended amount of time is just very, very tough. So, if I'm being perfectly honest, well, first of all, let me just say thank you again to the worship team. And can we just give up a little? I was going through a lot of anxiety about tonight's message, and I know that's not from the Lord. And the worship team really, the songs they sang really gave me a lot of peace. My wife also has been a great comfort for me tonight. The reason why I was experiencing this anxiety is well, to be perfectly honest, I'm not as good a preacher as Seth is. And that's okay, because I'm still very new at this, and he has literally almost a 20-year head start on me. So he is very, very good at what he does, and I'm sure you guys realize just as I do that he I don't want to give Seth a big ego or anything about it, but he's very good at what he does. But so as a newer pastor, I've struggled to kind of find my voice, my delivery, the way that I can translate how I hear God speaking to me to give to you as authentically as I can, but still kind of sound like myself. I don't want people to talk to me outside of hearing a sermon and say, well, who's that guy? How come I didn't hear that when he was preaching the word? It's trying to find points that people can take for their daily lives. It's not easy. It can be kind of frustrating at times, but it's not deadly. And I say that because I don't have any very poignant points for you to take away and apply to your daily lives. I have a key verse, and that's it. But basically, I'm just going to read from God's Word. And the Lord put the book of Esther on my heart. When I originally set out to write this message, I thought I would be speaking about men and compassion and things of that nature, and that's what I wanted to preach about. But the Lord wants me, He directed me to the book of Esther. So that's where we're going to be. If you want to follow along, great. We're going to go really quickly through the entire book of Esther, and then we'll kind of close things up at the end. And the thing about Esther, it's a very unique book in the Bible because, one, God is never mentioned one time in the entire book. It's also unique, two, because the hero of the book of Esther is a woman. And it takes place during the exile in Babylon, about 100 years after the exile in Babylon. It's between the years 483 and 473 BC. Esther is actually part of a harem of the foreign king. And so that's kind of the setting that we're in. And before we really get started, I would just like to pray once again. Lord, I thank you for once again this opportunity to bring your word to your precious body. I just ask that whatever you've given me, that it's able to, that you're able to translate it into the hearts of whoever has ears to hear it. I know that everything works out to the good for those who love you and are called to your purpose. And so I'm relying on that promise tonight. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Okay, so the fact that God isn't mentioned in the book of Esther is curious, right? I mean, it's kind of struck me as odd. I mean, we're talking about a book about God, and in one of the parts there, he's not mentioned at all. But as the reader, we're kind of invited to look for God's activity in the book, and the signs of it are everywhere. I just felt like there was something very important in the book of Esther that we need to catch. So I just want to just kind of jump right in. So starting in chapter 1, verse 3, it says, and in the third year of his reign, talking about King Xerxes, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the province were present. Continuing from verse 4, for a full 180 days he displayed his vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. So for 180 days, he's throwing this immense feast for all of the important people in his kingdom, right? And then after that's over, he's throwing another 7-day feast for everybody in the city, and basically the capital city, Susa. Basically just to show how awesome and great he is and all of the wealth that he has. And of course the wine is flowing very freely. So on the 7th day, when King Xerxes, the 7th day of the second feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded his 7 eunuchs who served him. I like that they said he was in high spirits from wine. So he was feeling pretty good. So he commanded 7 eunuchs who served him. I'm not even going to try to say all of their names. To bring him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Now this is the theme that's going to be very prevalent throughout the book, just so you can keep your ear for it. That the King Xerxes, he's very prone to drink and to fly into fits of uncontrollable anger. And then this is where the story really begins, because in his anger he issues a decree that he never again has to see Queen Vashti, and he then starts holding tryouts for the position of the queen. He literally holds a beauty pageant, like The Bachelor. He has virgins sent from all around the kingdom to come and audition for the part of the queen. This is where we meet Mordecai and Esther. So in chapter 2, starting in verse 5, it says, now there was a citadel, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin. Remember that. Named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother, so she was an orphan. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother had died. So now we're going to skip to verse 9 and 10, where Esther is kind of before the king, and he sees right? So she pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. So as a Jewish woman under the old law, a lot of this is very no-no. I mean, he's giving her special food that's probably, according to their diet, very unclean or impure. Plus, she's marrying a Gentile, you know. So she's in a tough way. But you know, this is what happens when you're in exile. So Esther. So even though it seems like her circumstances are going pretty good, it's still a tough situation. So Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. And so the next few verses are about Esther's preparations. I mean, she has to go 6 months with perfumes and whatnot, and then another 6 months with some other stuff. So we're just going to jump to verse 21. So basically, it's a year before she's ready. So in verse 21 it starts, it says that during that time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot, told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. Once again, another thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind, because it's repeated throughout the story. So God hasn't been mentioned once, yet all of these events seem to be divinely influenced, right? I mean, there's a lot of providence happening here. So chapter 3 is where we meet the villain of this story, Haman. So after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of his father, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or pay him honor, because Mordecai can't. I mean, he's in exile, and he knows the consequences, but he can't, because he can only kneel before God, right? So he can't. So he was enraged, talking about Haman. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In verse 7, it says, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the poor is a word, it's a word that means dice. It's just a dice. Was cast in the presence of Haman, and he did that to select a day and a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. So Haman has just rolled the dice to decide when to destroy the Jewish people. And I mean, to think of something so grandiose to be settled on a roll of the dice, right? Also, Haman, I don't know what he believed or what he worshipped, but he didn't worship any god apparently, because he just rolled the dice. I found that interesting, you know. In that day and time, you would think that he would do some sort of prayer or worship or offer or whatever, but no, he just rolled the dice. So you continue, I'm sorry, I digress. So then he convinces the king to sign an edict allowing him to wipe out all the Jews in the kingdom, and the king gives him his ring to put the royal seal on it. this was important because decrees made with the royal seal couldn't be reversed even by the king. Then the king and Haman have a drinking banquet, of course, to celebrate. They have a drinking banquet to celebrate. And this is very important because rings in the Old Testament, I mean, we know that a lot of things in the Old Testament are things that mean something spiritual to us with the covenant we're in now, the Christ covenant. And rings, they symbolize authority, right? So if the king signed this decree with his ring, even he couldn't say, okay, let's not do it, right? It's just the way it was. So when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Now, just to stop for a second, I love this imagery because to this point in the Bible, I don't think there was a significant man in any of the biblical stories that at some point hadn't torn his clothes, covered himself in ashes, and went about the town wailing. So much so that they kind of paraphrased it, just said he put on sackcloth and ashes. Because by this point you know that he's torn all of his clothes, put on clothes of sackcloth, and covered his whole body and head in ashes. And I like the fact that showing your emotions at that point in time was completely accepted. I mean, I don't know how I would feel if I seen someone I really respected, even in a situation where they were very upset, tear their clothes off and put on some sackcloth and dump ashes over their head and start marching around their neighborhood crying. I mean, that would kind of give me cause to pause, you know. I don't know. But I do love that imagery. I like that is something that was not just done, it was accepted. It was accepted. So basically the rest of this chapter, chapter 4, it's kind of a back and forth between Mordecai and Esther through one of her attendants named Hathach. Now the thing about this destruction of the Jews, it wasn't a secret plot. It wasn't just something that was known to a few people. This was literally front page news. I mean, this was a decree that the king had signed and sent to every corner of his kingdom. And, you know, Mordecai actually had a copy of this decree saying that his people were going to be destroyed on this particular day. So he gave the decree to Hathach to give to Esther, and then he asked her to go to the king, reveal her heritage as a Jewish woman, beg for mercy, and plead to the king for her people to be spared. Her response was pretty right on par for something like this, if you're asking me. So all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law. They are to be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But it had been 30 days since the last time she had been called to see the king, right? So you have to look at this kind of from Esther's point of view. If she goes in front of the king and he's drunk, which he's known to be, and he isn't ready to see her, he could fly into one of these uncontrollable rages, which he's known to do, and just immediately have her killed. I mean, the last queen, he made a decree that says he never has to see her ever again. And this could happen to Esther, and so her fears were very legitimate. So she sends that response to Mordecai, but his response was also very legitimate because he's kind of like, well, our backs are kind of to the wall. So he says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do not think that because you were in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance from the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows? But that you have come to your royal position for a time as this. So he's saying to her, I understand what you're saying, and don't worry. Even if you don't do it, we're still going to be saved, right? Even though he hasn't said God will save us, he knows that they're going to be saved. But you could be dead, right? You could be dead. And it's very possible that this is why you've been given the position you've been given. Another way you could say it was you were born for this, right? Everything that's happened in your life has led you to this moment for a purpose. So, verse 15 says, Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, Go, gather together all the Jews who were in Susa and fast with me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So once again, even though God isn't mentioned, she talks about fasting 3 days, and if it happens that she dies, she just dies. And this resonates with me only because, like I said earlier, about a year and a half ago, this was right at the beginning of 2018, I had a very extensive spinal surgery, and I'm sure I've said this a few times, so some of you already know this, but when I was being diagnosed and surgery was first becoming an option, I suffered from terrible, terrible fear. I had an older sister who went into the hospital for a surgery, and she never came out. So I had this very irrational fear of surgery, and a very good friend of mine really helped me to come to grips with that, and really to see that, if I trust in the Lord, then surgery it should hold no fear for me. So when me and my wife were in the hospital waiting to see a doctor, and we made this kind of vow to each other that no matter what happened over the course of this time, we were not going to give in to fear. And I even said, so if I die, you can't use this as a reason to blame God. It can't be anything. We can't think of anything negative that comes out of this as God's fault. No matter what, He is always good. And I'll never remember the peace that came over the both of us in that moment. And so I can understand where Esther's coming from. She's like, if I perish, I perish. But she has to go through with this task. So chapter 5 is where this really starts kicking off. Esther approaches the king, and he extends the golden scepter to her because he was pleased with her and asked her what her request is. Now think about that. I mean, she was so scared he could kill me, he could do whatever. She walks right in front of me, like, yes, come on in, right? I mean, this is how the Lord works. Even though He hasn't been mentioned, we get afraid and decide, no, you know what? I'm going to trust in God to do what's right for me and to fulfill His promises. And as soon as we confront that thing, it's like, yes, come on in. I'm so glad you showed up. Okay. And he asked her, what is her request, even up to half of the kingdom? And this is a great, she could only have gotten this divine inspiration through prayer and fasting, and I just like this. So she says to him, she just wants him and Haman to come to a banquet she prepared for him. So the king sends for Haman, and they go to the feast. And they have a blast. So then the king, at the feast, asks her, well, what is it that you really want? Even up to half of the kingdom. She says she just wants them both to come to a feast she's preparing for them tomorrow. And then she'll answer his question. I mean, how do you gain favor with somebody? You're like, hey, I just want you to come, like anything you want, just name it. It's like, I just want you to come to a feast I prepared for you. They come to that feast. Seriously, what do you really want? Actually, I just want you guys to come to a feast that I'm having for you tomorrow. Like, all right. And again, because this king, Xerxes, he likes a good feast. So he's there. In verse 9, Haman, he left the feast and he goes out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. So he goes home and brags about how good his life is to his wife and his family and his people there, but that none of it brings him any joy because Mordecai will not kneel before him. His wife tells him, and this might be one of the weirder pieces of advice that a wife gives her husband in the Bible out. They have a 50 cubit pole set up, and that's about 75 feet. And in the morning to ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it before they go to this feast. I mean, that's weird, right? I mean, that's weird. A 75 foot pole, I mean, that's an overkill, right? Could the 10 foot pole would have done that? Anyway, I'm sorry. So Haman liked that idea, so he had the pole set up, he went to bed. And that same night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in. I mean, that's really good night reading if you can't sleep. To be brought in and read to him. And it was found recorded that Mordecai had exposed Bigthan and Teresh, remember from back in the beginning, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway and who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So the king asked, so what honor and recognition did Mordecai receive for this? And because he'd completely forgotten about the guy who saved him from assassination. I mean, that's the privilege of being a king. You can forget the guy who saves your life. They say nothing has been done for him. So the king asked, so who's in the court? And he asked this because he knows that Mordecai is already in the court. He's in the court every day. He's always there. So the king asked, who's in the court, basically to carry out his will to Mordecai. And so it just so happens to be that it's Haman who is coming to ask the king to kill Mordecai. So when Haman entered, the king asked him, so what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman, who had, remember, he'd been elevated to above all the other nobles. He's in a prime position. He thinks the king is talking about him. So Haman says, oh, who could there be? The king, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for that man, the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe. The king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, one with the royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Right? So he's basically like, so if you want to honor me, what would be the best? How about one of your robes, which again in the Old Testament, the robes symbolize right standing with God. You know, at that time the kings thought they were descendants of the God, they thought they were God on earth. So Haman is thinking, if I get to wear your robe, that means I'm in right standing with the God of this area, right? This is what he's thinking. So he's like, bring your robe and have one of your sons lead me on one of your horses throughout the town and tell everybody that this is what is done for the king, for the man who the king delights to honor. I mean, talk about trying to live the good life, right? So the king says, go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you suggested for Mordecai. who sits at the king's gate, and do not neglect anything that he recommended. Right? For my worst enemy, he has to do this. So Haman must honor Mordecai. He eats all kinds of crow. After that, he kind of slinks home, dejected, and tells his people about all that happened, and everyone's like, since Mordecai is Jewish, you never had a chance. He's going to be your downfall. And I say it a little differently in the Bible, but that caught my attention, right? Like, just because he's Jewish, he's going to be your downfall? Like, why? And so I did some research, and so Haman is a Gaggite, which a lot of scholars think are descendants of the Amalekites, right? And if you go all the way back to 1 Samuel, Samuel captured King Agag, where he was supposed to kill everybody and not take any of the spoils. Well, he captured King Agag, but they took the spoils and he didn't kill the king. So if Haman is a descendant of the Amalekites, it even says that Mordecai, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul is also from the tribe of Benjamin. So if all this is true, then Haman, he's been harboring a deep family grudge. I mean, you talk about Hatfields and McCoys type stuff, where, no matter what, I have got to destroy not just you apparently, but all your people too. So that's kind of where it stands, where it says, you never really had a chance, and he's going to be your downfall. But he can't actually think on this, because right away the king's attendants are coming to bring him to the second feast that Esther has organized for them. So chapter 7 starts with the king and Haman and Esther's second banquet. And after a few drinks, the king asks her what her request is, even up to half the kingdom. And then starting there in verse 3, the Queen Esther answered, "If I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you to grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have been quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." So King Xerxes rightly asks, "Who is he? Where is he? The man who dared to do such a thing?" And I love Esther's answer, and I love imagining the righteous indignation that she said. She says, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." And you have to believe that as soon as Esther started saying, "My people are about to be destroyed and annihilated," Haman I just started thinking, wait a second, I didn't know she was Jewish. Oh no. So the king, in a rage, and starting to realize what's happening, the king gets up and leaves the room to walk out into the garden to kind of get his thoughts together. And Haman, knowing kind of what his fate has become, he stays there and he tries to beg Queen Esther for mercy. Now in verse 8, it says, just as the king is returning from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. Now you have to think about it. They've been at the second feast. They're kind of drunk. Now Haman's trying to walk over to where Esther's reclined on this couch, and he kind of stumbles and falls on top of her just as the king walks back in the room. And remember, he's already in a rage. So the king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" So basically he's saying, are you going to really try to attack the queen, right? I mean, you really don't care, Haman, right? And so as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered poor Haman's face. Only in the Bible can they give you reason to kind of feel bad for the bad guy, right? I mean, Haman, he really didn't know that his fate had been sealed as soon as he had set himself against Mordecai and the Jewish people. But at this point, I mean, it's all come crashing down. So then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "Hey, a pole reaching a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." So not only it has Haman now tried to kill the queen and all of her people, but he also tried to attack the queen in front of the king. And now the guy that the king has just honored, he finds out Haman wants to kill that guy. So then the king said, "Impale him on it," speaking of Haman. So they impaled Haman on the pole that he had set up for Mordecai. And then, and only then, the king's fury subsided. The enemy's dead, but the problem still remains. The decree to kill the Jews cannot be revoked even by the king. So the king gives Mordecai his ring. He gives Mordecai his authority and tells him to write another decree that says that the Jewish people can gather and defend themselves. And Mordecai is given Haman's position. So the awaited day comes, and the Jews kill the 10 sons of Haman and any of the Persian officials who sided with Haman. And then the king asked Esther, "Well, what about the Jews and the rest of the kingdom?" So Esther asked if a decree can be carried out the next day all throughout the kingdom. So the king agrees, and they send out this copy of the decree. And the next day, 75,000 men were killed in all the provinces of the kingdom. So afterward, Mordecai wrote another edict saying that the Jews should annually celebrate a 2-day feast to commemorate their deliverance from destruction. And that is the feast or the celebration of Purim. And it comes from the word Purim, which means dice. It's kind of, a play on the word there. Haman, he threw the dice to figure out the day of destruction. And so they're celebrating Purim. And then Mordecai is promoted even further to a position that's only second to the king in the kingdom. So, kind of wrapping it all together, the story is full of moments of what you would call ironic reversal. But if you take a step back, you can see that the whole story was written as ironic reversal. You start with the king's splendor and feasts and decrees at the beginning of the book. And those are mirrored by Mordecai's splendor, feasts, and decrees at the end of the book. Mordecai and Esther save the king at the beginning of the book, and at the end of the book, they save all of the Jews. You have Haman's elevation, his decree, and his banquet at the beginning. It's mirrored by Mordecai's elevation, decree, and banquet. Esther and Mordecai have 2 planning scenes wrapped around a centerpiece, wrapped around the centerpiece of Haman's humiliation, right? And Mordecai's exaltation. Another interesting thing about the story is there's a lot of moral ambiguity. I really tried my best to edit a lot of the story. I encourage everyone to read it and really go through it. It's deep and it's serious business. But there's a lot of anger, a lot of sex, a lot of killing, a lot of drinking. Esther and Mordecai, they're part of all of it. They also violate commands of the Torah. Like I said earlier, they marry Gentiles, they eat impure foods. But the story of Esther, the good thing about it is it's not about using Esther and Mordecai as moral examples, right? The Bible certainly is not endorsing this kind of behavior. But what they are put forth as models of is trust and hope in dire circumstances. So what's the point? What do we take from all this? So I feel that it seems like that when God seems absent, when his people are in exile, and I'm saying, when I say people, I say when I feel like I'm in exile. If you feel like you're in exile, when you've been unfaithful to the commandments and the commands that God put on you, when I feel like I've been unfaithful to the things God has put in front of me, does that mean that God's done with us? Of course not. Has he abandoned his promises? Of course not. God works knowing, obviously, the real moral dilemmas and messes that we make of our lives and that we have in our histories. And not only that, he'll use morally questionable people to accomplish his morally divine purposes. So Esther challenges us to trust God's providence even when we can't see it, even when it isn't acknowledged. And to hope that no matter how bad things get, no matter what circumstances you come from, whether you were born an orphan, whether you were born in exile, per se, whether you've made 1,000 terrible mistakes, whether you've been fired from multiple jobs, whether you've been to jail multiple times, whether you've suffered with addiction to whatever it might be, God is committed to redeeming not just you, but all of his people and this entire world.